discussing this, and we're talking about it almost seems ridiculous that we are still discussing whether or not he attended parties, whether there was cake, whether he's obviously been found guilty of breaking the lockdown rules. But were the rules necessary in the first place is the first question. And if they were necessary, then what he has done is deemed to be very bad. Of course, it is perhaps a resignable offence. Is it or not? I'm not sure.
Well, look, I certainly think in terms of partygate at the moment, I've been speaking to friends over the weekend, I do think opposition parties run the risk of overplaying their hand. Now, this is going to rumble on. For instance, one of the most damaging things that could still come out are photos of this. Now, imagine that splashed all over the Sunday papers, for instance. What I would say, though, in the short term, as Darren noted there, with a few exceptions, Conservative MPs are backing Boris into the May elections, and we'll see how the Conservatives perform there. But I would take this view, that on other issues is perhaps where the Conservatives should be really worried at the moment. For instance, on net zero, you see the Reform Party now in the latest YouGov poll, 10% of Leavers currently intending to vote for Reform UK. Of course, we've got the prospect of surging illegal migration across from France still. That's going on at a much higher rate than we saw last year. And just before we came on, I also just saw a YouGov poll that actually had the Labour Party now level with the Conservatives on the economy. Those outside of Partygate, outside of the bubble, those are the sort of issues that if I was a Conservative MP would be seriously troubling me.
Alan, do you share my frustration in a sense? And a little bit what Michael was saying, that there are issues which feel more pressing, I think, to the British public right now, and whether he did the right thing or not. But I don't think this is what he should be apologising for. There are lots of other things he should be apologising for.
Well, I think that's the case. To be honest, I think there should be an apology and a commitment that we should never have lockdowns again. Many of the restrictions were about theatre. We know that there was a campaign of fear with the behavioural psychology unit, the imposition of nudge, an inability to have transparency. Parliament was suspended. We jettisoned the pandemic strategy. We were constantly had this repetitive narrative that you mustn't do this, that you'd get fines, anything from £100 to £10,000. I remember being a police officer a police officer embarrassingly asking me to get up off the park on my own when he should have been able to do much more important things. We know the country now knows, and we're beginning to see a lot of the things that have come out, that actually many of these measures were not required. If you look at what happened with Sweden, there were alternative measures, there were different approaches that we could have taken, and yet what happened was that we had these lockdowns and restrictions. Then the Prime Minister doubled down and he said, well, he wouldn't rule them out again, and perhaps there might be a variant that affects children. Again, disingenuous, because we know that still, the elderly and the vulnerable and those with comorbidities are the ones most at risk. And I really think it's very problematic. I think if he is going to apologise and if he were to resign, it should be around the fact that lockdowns were imposed, that we were told 15 million jabs to freedom, but now we're being told that 5 to 11-year-olds need to have a vaccine. I'm not sure why. About a range of measures that have been damaging for the economy. And let's be honest, the cost of living crisis, whether to heat or eat, came way before Ukraine. That's exacerbating things, absolutely.
Yeah, and that's a frustration, isn't it? Emma, well done. You've hot-footed it here. Emma Burnell.
And I would like to unreservedly apologise for being late.
Well, was it your fault, and did you know what time you were meant to be here, Emma? This is the question, isn't it?
I absolutely knew what time I was meant to be here, and whether or not it was my fault, I did not take sufficient measures to make sure that I delivered as I was supposed to.
We forgive you. You're here now, and that's what matters. But, Boris Johnson said today, I don't know whether you got to see him live, you might have been underground on the Tube, that he said it didn't occur to me then or subsequently that it was a breach of the rules. Now, actually, I believe him, because I don't think he's the kind of man that would have known the detail of the rules at that time. We did. We were having ludicrous situations where we were having Zoom calls with grandparents meeting their new grandchildren for the first time. We were having, awful disputes within families about who could or couldn't go to funerals or weddings, and the ludicrousness when you look back at some of the things that we were forced to do. Did he genuinely, do you think, not really? I think he probably didn't understand how we were all living our lives.
I think if I didn't know that it was illegal to kill people and then murdered someone, I wouldn't get away with it. He set the rules. He is ultimately responsible.
But do you not remember how much they changed?
They did change them, but do you not remember who was in charge of changing them? Ultimately, the buck stops with him. And, there are a lot of things I would suggest Boris Johnson should resign over. My list might be different from Michael and Alan's, but I've got one. But the point is, you cannot be a lawmaker who doesn't understand the laws, never mind a lawmaker who breaks them. It's just as simple as that. You can't, because now we could argue until the cows come home about what future things might happen that would necessitate some big change in the law. But why should I, if they pass a law that, say, Alan and Michael think are fabulous and I think is terrible, why should I do it? Who's going to tell me that there's any sort of responsibility for me to do it?
Well, I was just going to say that one of the problems, I think, is that there were so many different rules, and a lot of it was just presenting this show, because actually I do think even, because it's civil servants and other people that make rules and then he goes out and says it at the lectern, but actually it shows how problematic many of these rules and restrictions were. If we look at all the exceptions, you look at the Euros, if you look at COP26, if you look at G8, why is it the business people were able to travel and not other people? You see, what I really hope is that the public looks at this and takes a step back and thinks, yes, we made a huge commitment, we really, really sacrificed, but actually, what were all these measures about in the first place? And let's have an honest, robust discussion about it. Not this particular part, that can be part of it, but the much bigger question, because actually it should never be part of the policy repertoire again.
I absolutely, and I remember at the time thinking, will we one day look back at the ludicrousness? Will we look back at this and think, oh, what we were made to do, it was like satire? And I think we are getting there now. And for me, what I like about this story is the fact that it is pulling into focus for the majority of people to say, no, we're not doing it again. You won't be able to do that to us again, because if you didn't adhere to the rules that time, we aren't going to adhere to them next time. That might be good and bad. If there is genuinely a virus which comes along which is more lethal than COVID-19 was ever going to be for the vast majority of healthy people, then we are going to be in trouble, because the trust will not be there.
Yeah, look, I don't think Boris Johnson and those around him were knowingly breaking the rules, sitting there having a good laugh about it.
No.
The mistake I think they made was, given the huge sacrifices, it must have been a bit of a bubble in itself, a work bubble of what they were doing in there.
I think Westminster is always a bubble
exactly,
anyway, isn't it?
But especially when people aren't allowed on the street, it probably became increasingly insular. The mistake I think they made is, the cock-up is the fact that this level of scrutiny to what was going on in Downing Street was always going to come.
Well, was it?
Well, I think it was, because people were ultimately always going to be looking that those who are setting the rules were following them to the letter, given the sacrifices they make. And that's the mistake. I don't think this is some big conspiracy of they thought they're taking the mick out of the public. I just think they didn't think enough about the level of analysis of what exactly was going on in Downing Street was going to come. Well,